Hello, everyone, and welcome to Overtime of Chapter 3 in the Evidence-Based Practice webinar series, Spotting Low Quality or Questionable Evidence. I'm joined today by three of the speakers in the webinar who covered the topics of marketing, social media, memes, oh my, kind of using the internet and different websites to find research, rate that research, and also kind of interact with the people that are generating and interact with other consumers and users of the research. So with me, on my right, this way, no, that way, Andrea Young, second-year physiotherapy student at the University of Alberta, previously completed a Master of Science in Health Policy Research. That sounds really interesting. Studying patient engagement in the area of drugs for rare diseases. Andrea, was there any rare diseases in particular? Tell us really briefly about your thesis.
No rare disease in particular, just about broadly across the entire rare disease community.
Okay. So Andrea looks forward to gaining more experience in applying research evidence into her own clinical practice. And just below me, Alex Belmorato. When he's not scrolling through evidence-based practice memes, Alex is a second-year physiotherapy student. Alex and Andrea are in the same class at the University of Alberta, where he previously wrote a master's thesis about back pain, studying with myself and Jeff Bostic, looking at kind of media and educational campaigns around back pain. Alex looks forward to infusing research into his clinical interactions with patients and fellow clinicians. And he's pretty good volleyball player.
Well, maybe back in the day.
Used to be.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And just next to Alex is our other Alex, a pretty good basketball player. Alex Su is a physiotherapist intern in the Edmonton area and a recent graduate of the University of Alberta, where he also researched scoliosis. So clinical physiotherapy grad, but also a master's in rehab science. He studied with Eric Perron, if my memory serves. Alex enjoys engaging with fellow clinicians to discuss research evidence and reflect on his own experiences in public and private practice. So yeah, thanks very much for joining, and thanks for the talks that you gave. I mean, we didn't have a lot of time there, so just a little snippet, so we get to follow up on that and hopefully engage in a bit of conversation and debate about these topics. I want to start with Alex Su. Question for you. I know that you're now working at the Stollery Children's Hospital in Edmonton, so you kind of have probably more access to library and evidence resources than many new graduates. But can you talk to us about what it's been like for you as a new grad to transition from the university environment where you almost have like unlimited access to evidence to a practice setting?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thanks, Doug. It's honestly a little mind-boggling because in university, you're not really exposed to a lot of the clinical scenarios where you'll formulate new questions. And so you have all this unlimited resources from university, but you lose all of it in practice. And it's just kind of like contradictory, right? Bring up the access that I have through the hospital. I didn't even know that I had access to this until like a month ago, actually. But for anyone who doesn't know, Alberta Health Service has what we call Knowledge Resource Services, or KRS. And it's a way that you can access articles. They can get it for you. You can even ask a clinical question, and you have a librarian who creates a search for you or creates a PICO for you, and then gets all the resources for you. So super, super great access. But I think part of being a new grad is really like the speed of which the questions come at you. Like you're going to see so many different things in practice, whether that's hospital or private. And just the amount of questions that you'll try to formulate, the amount of research you'll try to dive into is just pretty exciting, but also overwhelming. So that's kind of how I'd characterize it right now.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine that. I went through that myself when I first started working as a PT. Yeah, besides some of the access, what other kind of barriers have you experienced in like in practice as a new grad?
Yeah, I think with just staying on topic of evidence-informed practice, I think part of the challenge is just honestly a workplace culture sometimes as well. Understanding if everyone is kind of evidence-informed, what's everyone's practices like? Are they staying up with all the research? Like I know in public, sometimes it's, are we updating our protocols? Are we staying up to date with the evidence? How do I find time for that within my own work hours, or how do I utilize time outside those hours? So definitely that work-life balance side of things is huge. It can be quite daunting, right? Going back to just the amount of different things that you might be seeing. So for a period of time, I was working both private and public, and it was like, how do I find the hours to even make sure I'm up to date with both of these areas?
Mhm.
So those are the main challenges I've had.
Right. Time to keep up on things, let alone surf the internet and scroll social media and see what all the researchers and other clinicians are up to. Let's go to Andrea now. Andrea, we recently had a workshop on campus that would encourage all of us rehab researchers to get social media accounts, become active on social media and post the research that we do. Do you think the same should be recommended for PT students or practicing therapists for that matter? Does everybody need a social media account? And if so, what account?
Yeah, I've been actually thinking about this a lot lately. So I'll say first off that I actually just have a personal account. It's not Andrea Physio account. So I don't tend to engage in the same way I guess I would expect someone who has a professional Twitter or a professional Instagram too. And I guess been struggling with that a bit because I've seen some of my classmates, they've started to create sort of these professional accounts for themselves. And I think that that's intriguing. It seems like a good way to share what we're learning and get feedback from other people, other students, other clinicians. But I also feel a little nervous early on in our career. I don't know where I see myself long term when I actually get out into the field. So I'm not actually sure as a student about making that jump, but I think it's a very useful tool, especially for someone who is already practicing. For some of the reasons I mentioned in my presentation, it is a good way to share what you're doing, share your experiences, talk with others, get ideas of those kinds of interesting or unique cases or what people are doing. But I just don't know as a student yet if I'm ready to do that. I don't know. I hear from Alex B, see how he feels as a student in that position too.
Yeah, I definitely share some of that hesitation, but also I feel like uh, in physiotherapy we talk about all competencies, right? And I think there's these things, and social media use I think is one of them, where it's like there's these things that are just a part of practicing, and it's going to evolve how complex you are at these skills and what you're doing with them. I feel like just in terms of networking, marketing, and then like the knowledge translation elements of it, there's just so much to be gained by being somewhat competent and then trying to bump up and do more complex things with it. Like the sky's the limit. So it feels like a kind of a, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater type thing. Um, I definitely think people should be engaging and learning how to utilize this tool better, because this is like if you think about communication, this is like one of the biggest advancements in society. Like I think of old school um, sci-fi shows, and like we can't teleport. Yeah, yeah. There you go. There you go. That was planned. Um, no, we can't teleport. We can't. There's all sorts of things we can't do from those shows, but can we video call somebody on a little handheld device? Yes. Can we look up any bit of information online? Yes. Right. So um, I think the potential is there. You just have to kind of whittle away and sharpen your tools at how to yeah, navigate it and find the good stuff.
So there's a lot there that you both said that I want to follow up on. So first of all, I guess my question is, you both talked about getting information from social media, but also sharing information, right, through marketing, or, you know, if you research for knowledge translation and sharing the papers that you write. I guess, what do you think is more important? Is it more important to learn right now? Are you learning from social media, or are you like engaging? Are you sharing? Are you debating and maybe arguing with people? Or what are you doing online? What do you spend most of your time doing?
I think I spend most of my time learning, probably. So reading posts, bookmarking them. If I am sharing them, it's usually sending to groups of friends and other chats, getting their thoughts on it. We've done that a bit. Yeah, so I'm not getting into any sort of public debates in the comments section. That hasn't been my go-to move. But definitely I bookmark a lot of stuff that I think is a good study resource. So I think both Alex's talked about like infographics and just how nice it is to have that information presented so cleanly. And so it's been information I know from class, but I'm like, this is a really nice way to remember it. So I save that. So that's really more where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I feel like both are important. Maybe starting with the learning side is probably good. One thing I find too is, okay, so maybe you're working in one specific specialty, area, and you kind of start to figure out how to find good resources related to that on social media. But there's so many things related, that's outside of the meat and potatoes of your scope, right? Like, we just in school we're just talking about motivational interviewing. Like, that's something really applicable to all sorts of um, practice settings. So if you are able to find good information on social media in your specialty, well, then when you're actually not familiar with the content and you're looking at stuff like, psychology stuff, motivational interviewing was the example I thought of, but even like, nutrition, health and fitness stuff, like other realms, then you have a bit of tools in the toolkit to how to decipher and find good info. So I think that's the place to start. And then from there, maybe it's practice setting specific. Like, if you're in private practice and that's going to be a big part of your marketing, it's probably important to engage. Maybe less so for other settings, but I'm early in my career, so I could be wrong.
So Alex S., this question is for you. Andrea said that she only has a personal account. So you, as a practicing physiotherapy intern, do you kind of run multiple accounts, like a professional account, personal account? Is it all merged into one? Do you even try to make a separation there? What's your approach?
Yeah, I think it's a I think it's a very individual choice for myself. I just have my one personal account. And yeah, it's kind of something that I've had classmates kind of poke at me and be like, create a professional account, do it. It'll be good. Share what you think, right? But I find myself kind of just not comfortable with that. I like having my own personal account, but that being said, I know I have a very good community of physios and classmates around me, and I still share physio content on my stories or tag people in memes or posts and stuff, just to kind of share those things and engage in the conversation. Not engaging in debate at all, but kind of just, yeah, in private chats and stuff, we'll discuss things usually.
So what are your favorite social media platforms? We got Twitter. Do y'all have Twitter? Instagram? Facebook? Yeah, you're doing it all. What about TikTok? No TikTok yet. But you'll be there. I bet within 6 months, I'm sure you'll all be there. Which ones do you spend the most time on when it comes to physiotherapy type issues?
Instagram. Yeah, that's where I tend to look at a lot most of Twitter. I don't tend to follow any of the physiotherapy accounts, primarily Instagram.
Is that the same for the Alexes?
I was gonna say Instagram can be really good. Like, a lot of stuff there's really good resources that are like, you just really have to make it bite-sized. So it can be already prepackaged in a way that you can communicate it or show it to a patient, which I really like. I do find that there's some really good like groups and stuff in Facebook that have really good conversations, and you can really not only just sharing content, but then actually discussing it in like a meaningful way. So that's which also happens on Twitter too, but it's a little more, it can get a little more chaotic, I think. Facebook, it can be a little more contained.
Yeah, I agree with that. Instagram for me is what I use the most. I feel like Instagram, just to kind of tag on to what Alex was saying here, Instagram's really good at that eye catching, like, make it fit the screen, really, really quick stuff. Whereas I think Twitter is that more, you're there for the thread of conversation as opposed to the actual content of the original post. And then the Facebook groups, you get just this super wide array of discussion, and it's a lot more digestible, I think, than a Twitter thread, in my opinion.
I've also seen some Twitter like people live tweeting conferences or just giving updates while they're at conferences, and that kind of stuff is really cool.
The other thing that I see a lot on Twitter are researchers sharing links to their new paper. So actually Twitter is how I get most of the new papers and new information that I come across. Instagram I found a little bit hard because you don't have that link to the original source. It's usually some kind of an image, like a meme or an infographic. Can you explain what's the difference between a meme and an infographic? Can anybody tackle that one? Andrea?
Alex B, go for it. I think this is right up your alley.
Yeah, exactly. So the meme, I feel like it's usually like there's some comedy infused in there. Like the meme is usually like an image that everyone's familiar with, and so you get a bit of a joke, like it's kind of like an inside joke. Everyone understands what this image is getting at, and then there's usually a bit of nostalgia or so, like a shared, like if it's from some movie or some old YouTube video of whatever, and then you can add the content onto that. So there's all these like real niche rehab memes that are funny, but also making a point, right? Whereas the infographic is a little more official, and that's when I think infographic, I think of something that's kind of like it'd be like a poster, real digestible, with some images that are kind of conveying, maybe summarizing a paper or summarizing just like a certain aspect of clinical practice.
Now, it seems to me like both of these, like they can be effective for presenting information in a bite-sized piece, but it is a little bit superficial. So do you have any advice or tips for kind of that critical appraisal side of things? Like, how do you judge the quality of a meme? Or an infographic? What do you do? Do you just trust whatever comes up, or do you try to dig to the original source?
Yeah, I think especially with a meme, I'm definitely scrolling down to look at the caption that they've included. The more information, the better. I kind of feel like I want a lot of detail. I've seen some accounts where they actually kind of go piece by piece, almost kind of abstract format to give you the details of the study. And I'd like to see the reference so that if I want to, I can find it myself. I think more of that information is usually included in the infographic itself, just because, like Alex said, it is more official. But if it's just a meme and they've provided no context in the caption, especially as a student, I might not even be in on the joke then at this point. So I definitely need more detail.
Same with you, Alex's?
I was gonna say, like finding the original source is a big thing, and I think one thing that can seem overwhelming with like approaching social media this way is like, okay, well, do I have to dig into every single paper once I see something, as I'm scrolling? And I would say no, like that's just not realistic. So I think for me personally, I try to set up some rules and set it up in a way so I'm like minimizing bias as much as possible. But then obviously there's still going to be a lot of stuff that's just confirming my bias on my feed, right? So it's like, I think most of the time I'm at least being aware of that is the start. And then occasionally digging in and saying, okay, this is a controversial piece, or this is something that really challenges my current view, or yeah, you know, just when you see these like memes or whatever about new research, then okay, just occasionally digging in a little deeper and looking at the actual paper.
I agree with that. Sorry, I thought I just muted myself. Andrew and Alex did a fantastic job of explaining, you know, what they look for in their posts and their presentations. And exactly what Andrew said is what I do is I look at the caption. Usually if it's a more reliable account or a worthwhile account, in my opinion, they'll include the article or they'll include the citation and they'll explain why they kind of came to that conclusion. Obviously with memes, it's meant to be kind of like comedic, as Alex said. So it's going to be sometimes dramatic. And I think meme makers or content creators often know that you should be the one appraising the evidence at the end of the day. They're not trying to package it in a way that supersedes your ability to actually critically appraise evidence.
All right, thanks. Now, one thing that I've noticed online, and maybe Twitter for me has been worse for this, but you know, sometimes people get a little bit worked up. There is a little bit of, you know, argumentation and debate and even some chaos. And do you have any strategies for either dealing with that, coping with that, avoiding that, or engaging with that effectively? Thoughts on the negativity and the chaos?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot because there are like I find in the field that I'm really interested in, there's a lot of very vocal figures who are like having these intellectual debates, but then they're just really, it's getting very aggressive, right? And I think one thing to make sure of is that we don't generalize and just say that all, you know, that all of social media, oh, it's just, you know, the comment sections are just terrible. Never look in the comment sections. Like that's kind of a common trope nowadays is, and I think there is kind of like, I found there's kind of like three levels. There's like, if you are on some local newspaper and you look at the comment section, that is going to be a tire fire. Like it's going to be terrible. It's going to be bad grammar. You're barely going to be able to understand the arguments and it's going to be bad, right? But then there's kind of a second level, which is the upper two levels are more common, I think, in rehab stuff. That's more just social media. That's more general politics stuff and stuff like that. Then sometimes you get debates where it's like somebody who is maybe a layperson or just kind of making an argument just out of ignorance, right? Like they're just saying the first thing that comes to their mind, and then someone who actually knows what they're talking about. So it's kind of like an uneven scale. And I think you can learn a bit from that, like reading that kind of a interaction, because obviously the two are neither's gonna change the other one's mind, but you can clearly see who's thought about this more deeply, and you can, and just the arguments they're making. And I think there's something valued to be reading that a little bit, you know, sometimes. But then the third level, I think that's where, like I was saying, how there's these Facebook groups that are having these specific conversations. Sometimes they get heated, yes, but I think those are actually the worthwhile ones to read, where it's actually two people talking about a controversial topic that they're both well versed in the topic, and it's fascinating. Like I think about hearing these stories of like old school, you know, thinkers in rehab and doing live debates, and like people would come and watch and they'd debate bracing versus hollowing or whatever it is. And you know, like people would pay to come watch, and it would be like, you know, you'd twirl your mustache afterwards and think about like, you know, now you can do that any time of the day. You can go online and there's these great thinkers who are arguing their side. So I try to not generalize and just try to sift out and find those types of debates, I guess. because I think that's what's going to really help us young clinicians grow and challenge our current beliefs and all that good stuff.
Any thoughts on that, Andrea or Alex S?
Yeah, I liked the way you kind of broke down those levels of debates that are taking place, because it clearly then you can see, okay, these ones might be worth the energy it takes me to kind of read through that. Whereas, you read one of those, kind of the first level you were talking about, maybe on a news website, and you just feel exhausted afterwards and you're emotionally tapped out. But picking and choosing when it's actually worthwhile for you. I think also, I mean, not that we're necessarily the ones engaging in these debates at this point, but one thing I've noticed on Twitter recently is people actually taking the time to clarify when they think that someone is attacking them or trying to start an argument. And I don't see that super often. So to see it recently and then end up seeing that it was actually a miscommunication or a misunderstanding and the conversation actually moved forward after that. So I think on a personal level, just trying to step back and relax and not take things necessarily personally, and recognize where a misunderstanding might have taken place is probably helpful. Yeah, Alex, if you had any more to add to that.
Yeah, I think I really support Alex B's statement about not shying away from the actual comments, I guess, or the discussion that's being held. Sorry. I think it is challenging. There's obviously, I think Doug, you've mentioned before, there's bots, there's fake accounts, there's spam. That's all in the comment sections, but it is a bit of an art, I guess, to navigate into those higher level, third level conversations that Alex was mentioning. I think with Facebook groups that you're mentioning, Alex, I feel like you can have those higher level conversations because sometimes you have like a request to join the group, and that in itself is already just a simple barrier between someone who's just casually navigating and just wanting to say something inflammatory versus people who are actually invested in the conversation, invested in discussing different topics. So sometimes looking for those types of areas, like whether that's even podcast debates or Facebook group debates, are ways that you can just get that natural filtering through just the level of access you have.
Right. You mentioned that the general public have access to a lot of these conversations and debates. Do you think there's any risk of the general public having access to these like vigorous debates going on between physios, especially really, even experienced researchers? Or is all debate good and worthwhile?
I think it's somewhat inevitable, that it's gonna so it's just out there, right? So I think to some extent the public's gonna see it. But having said that, so because of that, I think personally, I think you should carry yourself a certain way online. Like, I don't think I would, really start to attack people who disagree with me about these, gray areas in physio. But it's out there anyway. So I think if anything, you just have to be a skilled clinician at communicating to patients when they come to you, and you just have to. And this is also a big bonus okay, we're saying a lot of us really like Instagram, and it's really digestible, it's quick, but they're actually still giving you all the relevant info. Like what good practice of if a patient comes up to you and says, well, I read this big fight about they used to do it this way and now they do it that way. If you can communicate in a really palatable way for a layperson, then you really know your stuff, right? So I think being exposed to some of this debate can help once that does happen in the clinic. But more often than not, I was actually going to add this to my presentation, but I ran out of time, that I also try to follow a lot of just bigger accounts, not a lot, just I make sure that I have a couple bigger accounts that are just relevant to physio or rehab stuff, because I'm still in school and I've had patients come up to me and say, hey, oh, you're the physio guy, like check out this YouTube account. This guy has all these great exercises, or check out this whatever. So there's accounts that lay people are following. So I think it is important to follow a couple of those, just so you kind of have your fingers on the pulse of what kind of info they're getting and what kind of beliefs lay people and patients are going to have. I think that's really important.
Another thing that I've found really fantastic about social media is I find that it levels the playing field, right? Like lots of times you don't know who these people are, but you can engage, you can have a conversation. And if I want to track down someone that wrote a paper, or the big names in physiotherapy, if I want to, interact with Paul Hodges, I go to his profile. You can send him direct messages. Maybe, I don't know if he'll respond there, but you can certainly comment on any posts that he has, and kind of have a dialogue and debate with the actual people that are generating evidence and doing the research. So I really like that about social media. That's kind of all the questions that I had for the three of you. Is there anything that you'd like to follow up on more or ask of each other?
I actually had a couple of questions for Alex and Andrea based off of your presentations. I'll just pull them up on my computer really quick, if that's all right. But yeah, a couple of questions here. It's just kind of your perspectives on, oh, where is it? It moved on me. My apologies. If anyone has anything else, you can fill it in.
I think I might have edited those on you, Alex.
Okay, I got it now. But yeah, Andrea, part of the conversation you've had today and part of your presentation, you mentioned that social media is a great tool to offer students a look into clinical practice and some, case scenarios that people run into. So knowing that there's such a wide spectrum of content quality and expertise out there, do you believe that physios in training are more likely to carry any more or less bias now that they enter the program or even within the program? And how do you think that actually affects how they digest the content within the curriculum? And I'll obviously extend that to Alex Belmirato as well.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I feel like, so I was thinking about this question earlier, and I think that outside of social media, like this just depends a lot on who the student is, what their background is, maybe what education they had beforehand. I think all of those factors impact the biases that we enter the program with. But reflecting on even just grad school in general, I feel like grad school is really a time where you start to learn to be critical, and to consider your own biases and how you can kind of go about addressing that. I know we start to kind of do that in undergrad in theory, but I do feel like grad school is kind of the big time, the big transition period, and learning the skills to be able to do that. So I don't know if I can answer whether they're more or less biased. I do think it depends on the person, but I think that it is that transition of, okay, now we're giving you the tools so that maybe you can start to recognize and think about that bias before you get out into practice. And I think one other thing I wanted to mention is just that I think even outside of physio specific social media, I think social media is exposing people to more perspectives just in general, and giving them, opening people's eyes to like inequities in our healthcare system and things that I personally feel I didn't really get exposed to until I was higher in my education. So I think that maybe we'll start seeing the younger generations as they come up and enter university being just even more aware than we were when we entered the program.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I think, yeah, I could definitely see with some people, like, I think when you think about evidence-based practice or just, these holding beliefs, I feel like sometimes there can be like, you start where you're very confident with your beliefs, even though you haven't really looked into it that much. And then as you start to look into it, the confidence goes way down, and then you just slowly become more accurate, and then the confidence comes back up, right? Maybe that happens a little faster, just given the or it could happen faster if you're talking about a student who's into rehab stuff, and they're consuming lots of info. Back in the day, there just wasn't as much info to be found, right? Like I remember hearing about these famous strength coaches who used to just like, they would have a subscription to some like muscle magazine that would have workouts in it, and that's like where they got their start of getting info. Nowadays you can find absolutely anybody's method online, right? So maybe the wheels will start turning, and you'll shift your thinking sooner. I could see that happening.
That's a good point, Alex. And I don't know, it almost seems to me like the longer you're in the profession, the more questions you have. And I often think about that quote, was it Socrates? True wisdom consists in knowing that you know nothing, right? And you do get to this point where you kind of value all the opinions that are out there, and you sort and sift through them and try to pick the ones that work for you or that are the most trustworthy. Alex, as you talking about students coming in with papers and things that they found online. For me, I've really appreciated that, in fact, and I really like it when students are that engaged, and many times they're almost more up to date than I am. They'll bring a new paper into my class, and we'll be able to look through that and praise the paper or see how it kind of relates to what is already known on the topic. So I love that. Haven't found any problems with it.
I think I've definitely seen examples, like in our cohort and just other years and whatever, of people who come in with really strong beliefs, strong biases. I don't know if it's different from previous, I don't know if this has evolved. But what I've definitely found is that, okay, so then all of a sudden we're in school together, and we're all chatting, and we're all learning together, and you start to respect everybody's opinion, and as you get to know one another, well, then I might see someone posting about something, and instead of it just being some stranger online, it's like, oh, that's so and so from class. Well, I never thought of it that way, or like, I've never even considered that topic, or what's this all about? And I'm a lot more open to just considering it, or, oh, I wonder what this perspective is, because I know them, and I know that they're reasonable, and I know that they're curious like me, right? So I think if anything, yes, maybe they're coming in with more biases, but I think once you put like a face to the name, and you see them every day, and you're in the trenches in school with them, it's like, oh yeah, you're very open to hearing what they have to say.
Cool. I'm very glad I got everyone's perspective on that. That's awesome. It's more than I expected.
So on that topic of different perspectives, just kind of advertisement for future chapters in this webinar series, we will be going through in the next session, I think it's in February, we're going to be talking more about critical appraisal, actually appraising papers and how do you rate high quality versus low quality evidence. But another topic that Leanne Loranger has asked us to talk about is what happens when there's a discrepancy between evidence, your clinical experience, and the patient's values, and what they want out of treatment. So that's going to be an interesting debate as well, because sometimes they all match. It's perfect, that's great, but quite often they don't. So we'll have to kind of work through that, come back with some strategies for what to do in February. But until then, thanks for listening. I would encourage you to follow all of our panelists here on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, not yet on TikTok. Is there any tricks to finding you on these social media accounts? Or if people search by your names, can they, do you pop up pretty easily? Just search by your names?
Not 100% sure. Leave me by name.
Maybe they don't want to be followed.
I'm good with flying under the radar. I'm very open to conversation. Send me an email.
Emails would be great. Yeah, if
That's what
we
I'm
may.
You can follow me. I've got nothing to hide. It's Belmo5 is my Instagram. That's a good start. I did have a thought in closing. If you're thinking of, if I was talking to somebody who's pretty new to social media use in this way, like a little bit of advice that I would give that I didn't have time in my presentation, but we gave all these tips and tricks, and it can be a little front loaded, right? Like it does sound like a lot of work. Okay, well, go to the origin of the, find the original post, look through the paper, do all this stuff. Like it's a lot of options of stuff you can do, but it's kind of front loaded. Like it's like a lot of things in life where it's once you're good at it, it gets so quick and so easy, and the payoff is so worth it, right? Like being more competent at just being able to access all this info, this great info, or these great resources that you can share with patients. Like there's so many images and infographics and things that I will just pull up on my phone and show patients, because it's just another tool in my toolbox for communication. So it's a bit front loaded, but I think once you get it going, it's smooth sailing, and I think it's well worth it.
I agree. And the sheer wealth of information that's available to you, right just on your fingertips, with a little bit of investment of time, well worth it. The only thing, I guess we didn't really talk about this, but Sci-Hub, I did hear from the librarian at the U of A last week, don't go to Sci-Hub. That's illegal. Stay away from Sci-Hub. All the others are okay.
I'll just say again, Doug, that I do not endorse anything in my presentation. I just present that it's there.
Right. Well, thank you three very much. Thanks for your talks, and thanks for joining today. And I will talk to you later.
It's been a pleasure, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for hosting. This was great.